Carlson, tonight we've seen an awful lot of change during the 2 years Trump has been president. American politics has been completely reordered, but also the American media has changed forever. News organizations that seemed like a big deal just 5 years ago are now extinct. Some of them are totally forgotten. Those that remain have either degraded themselves beyond recognition, like The New Yorker, or they've been purchased by Jeff Bezos to conduct unregistered lobbying for Amazon.com, like The Washington Post. It's hard to remember that not so long ago, America had prestige media outlets. Harvard graduates literally went to work for Newsweek rather than private equity. Not anymore. Teen Vogue now has a news division. And so does a New York-based cat blog called BuzzFeed. If you're an affluent single person in a gentrifying part of Brooklyn who likes cats, and of course that's redundant because they all like cats, then you know and you love BuzzFeed. When a BuzzFeed headline commands you to, quote, "Stop everything and watch this cat who loves the ocean," you do. You stop everything. You watch that cat. When BuzzFeed offers one of its trademark cat quizzes, you dutifully take the quiz. What kind of personality does your cat actually have? Or, how cat are you? Take this quiz. Meow. You think you know a lot about cats. BuzzFeed knows more. On all questions feline, BuzzFeed is the final authority. But what happens when BuzzFeed tries to do real news? Well, in early 2017, we found out. The site released the now famous Trump dossier. It was a catalog of salacious and unverified gossip, financed by the DNC originally, about President-elect Trump. Many other news outlets, nearly all of them anti-Trump, had seen the dossier, but they passed on it. It was just too irresponsible to run. But not BuzzFeed. They thought it was perfect. Meow! So they ran it. 2 years later, the BuzzFeed dossier has come to define the entire Trump-Russia collusion conspiracy tale. The problem is, a lot of the dossier is pretty clearly untrue. For example, one of the key claims in the dossier that BuzzFeed ran is that Trump attorney Michael Cohen held secret meetings with Russian agents in Prague. They never offered any evidence that that happened. There never was any evidence. And then finally, last week, Michael Cohen himself confirmed it never happened.
You ever been to Prague?
I've never been to Prague.
Never have.
I've never been to the Czech Republic.
You might balance my time.
Well, so that seems like a pretty big development. 2 years ago, BuzzFeed told us, you remember it, we did a show on it, that Michael Cohen held a secret meeting with Russian spies in Prague. We've been hearing about that ever since in Congress and on cable news. We have, in fact, halted the normal workings of government, in part because of that meeting. Now it turns out it never took place. So it's not a small thing to learn from Michael Cohen. How did BuzzFeed cover this latest stunning development? Well, they didn't cover it. They ignored it completely. As of tonight, BuzzFeed was promoting instead a story entitled 21 Completely Life-Changing Things You Can Make in a Waffle Maker. There was nothing about the non-existent Michael Cohen Russian spy meeting in Prague. If you only read BuzzFeed, you would never know that that story was false. Well, apparently a lot of people in media only read BuzzFeed and not simply for its lavish cat coverage. This January, BuzzFeed published a story with this sentence, quote, "President Donald Trump directed his longtime attorney Michael Cohen to lie to Congress about negotiations to build a Trump Tower in Moscow," end quote. BuzzFeed presented no evidence to show that that was actually true, just unnamed sources. But it didn't matter. The cat lovers on cable news went crazy.
This would be certainly a bombshell information.
BuzzFeed's latest bombshell report.
The White House is slamming a bombshell report by BuzzFeed.
With a bombshell report from BuzzFeed.
If the BuzzFeed bombshell is true.
A bombshell report.
It was really a bombshell. And actually, in some sense, it was. The claim was, anyway, directing someone to lie under oath is a felony, and it ought to be. Had this been true, the Trump presidency likely would have ended, and for good reason, legitimate reason. But it wasn't true. Instead, it was a lot like the claim that, I don't know, cats suck the breath from babies, or that a black cat brings bad luck. It was a wives' tale posing as fact. The Mueller investigation itself batted down BuzzFeed's story almost immediately after it came out. And yet, BuzzFeed never retracted the piece. Once again, in its feline way, the site pretended that nothing had happened. You can yell at a cat, but you can't make a cat pay attention, it turns out. To be clear, here are the key quotes from the January BuzzFeed story. Quote, "Trump directed his longtime attorney Michael Cohen to lie to Congress," end quote. And again, quote, "The president personally instructed him to lie," end quote. And once again, quote, it is the first known example of Trump explicitly telling a subordinate to lie directly about his own dealings with Russia. Explicitly telling a subordinate to lie. That's the claim. Okay. Democratic members of Congress asked Michael Cohen last week about that specific claim. Cohen was under oath at the time, a declared enemy of Donald Trump, not someone who had any reason to lie about this. Here's how he responded.
Mr. Trump did not directly tell me to lie to Congress. That's not how he operates.
Okay, let's try to make sure we've got this totally clear. Trump directed Michael Cohen to lie. He personally instructed him to lie. He, quote, explicitly told him to lie. Those are the claims from BuzzFeed. Did Michael Cohen really do that? Here's his account again.
Did the president in any way, from your point of view, coach you in terms of how to respond to questions or the content of your testimony before a House committee?
Again, it's a difficult answer because he doesn't tell you what he wants. What he does is, again, Michael, there's no Russia, there's no collusion, there's no involvement, there's no interference. I know what he means because I've been around him for so long. So if you're asking me whether or not that's the message, that's staying on point, that's the party line that he created, that so many others are now touting, yes, that's the message that he wanted to reinforce.
That's the message. So Michael Cohen says, you just heard him say, that Trump claimed there was no Russian collusion and no interference in the 2016 presidential election. If that sounds familiar, it's because that's exactly what Trump has been telling the world for 2 years, every day in a loud voice to anyone who will listen. BuzzFeed claims that this is somehow proof that its original story was entirely accurate. 19 adorable Siamese kittens that are actually talented investigative reporters. We're waiting for that story next. Ben Smith is the editor-in-chief of BuzzFeed News. He was game enough to join us tonight, and obviously we're grateful for that. Not his first time on the show, but I'm thankful that you came. So, Ben, let me just ask you first about the dossier. This really is a sincere question. So you published a dossier. You and I have debated whether or not that was a wise move or an ethical move, but you did. Then we learn in the testimony, and I don't think anyone would doubt it, that Cohen did not, in fact, go to Prague. Now, we only believe that he did go to Prague because you ran the story. But you never ran a follow-up story informing your readers of that. Why?
You know, that's just totally false, Tucker. Within I think weeks of publishing the dossier, obviously we were reaching out to Cohen, and Cohen graciously allowed us to photocopy the inside of his passport. And
I remember the story.
And we published a very detailed account of his denial that he had gone to Prague, and showing every bit of evidence we could get. But no, I just read that story. Hold on, I just read that story about 20 minutes ago, so it's very fresh. I don't totally understand why you're saying that we haven't published a story saying Cohen said he didn't go to Prague. Let me explain. He's been saying consistently that he didn't go to Prague.
No, I just read the story that you published. It does not say, because you didn't have evidence of the fact conclusively, that he didn't go to Prague. Last week, we have him under oath with no motive for lying, saying conclusively that he didn't go to Prague. That's one of the headlines out of those hearings. How could it not be? And yet you ignored it. Since you're the one who published the dossier in the first place, don't you have an obligation to kind of tie a bow in the story and tell us what happened in the end?
You know, I mean, I guess we don't see tying bows as our primary obligation. We did cover the hell out of that, and particularly that aspect, from sending reporters to Prague to writing Michael Cohen's repeated denials of this.
But now we know for a fact that it didn't. So in other words, if I read a story,
I'm surprised that you think Cohen's latest statement makes it more of a fact than his previous statements.
Well, I added
it certainly wasn't a new development that he denied.
To what we know, that we finally get to ask Michael Cohen in public, and he has every reason to tell us that yes, he went to Prague. And that, yes, everything you think about Trump is true, because we all hate Trump in media world. He hates Trump, too. Now he can tell us the truth. And instead he tells us the opposite, that no, he didn't go. But that's not all. The dossier also claimed that poor Carter Page, whose life has been destroyed because of the salacious nonsense in that dossier, that he received $11 billion from a Russian energy company in a deal. Now, he didn't, but I don't think BuzzFeed's ever told us that. Why not?
So we published the dossier at the time, as we talked about then, not because we had been able to stand up or knock down every allegation. In fact, we said, unverified document, and an extremely important document, public document at the heart of an FBI investigation. I actually, you know, when we talked about this last time, I got the sense you basically agreed with that, and certainly the idea that Devin Nunes would have been able to press his case against the against the Russian investigation, while saying there is this secret document. You know, it really makes my case, but you're not allowed to see it, that you would have been able to make the arguments you've made about Christopher Steele, about these documents, and the people on the other side would have all the while saying, but this document will scald your eyes out if you look at it, so only we, the elect, we journalists, can look at it.
I get it.
I mean, that's why we published it. You understand why we published it. I don't understand why you're saying this.
I said it at the time. I think that's not a crazy argument to make that you made, and I am instinctively in favor of openness. But you're a journalist, not simply a guy who runs a platform. You're not running Medium here or Google. You're running a news site. And so you inject these claims into the public sphere, and then you don't follow up. So if I run a piece by one of your neighbors saying, you know, Ben shot somebody, don't I kind of have an obligation when you get acquitted of the crime to write a story on that? I think I do. And you did, but you didn't. Why didn't you?
There are a lot of claims there. We've invested a lot of energy in running the ones down that we could. Some of them are very, very hard to confirm or knock down. Discussions between Vladimir Putin and his aides. Cohen's was pretty straightforward. And we put a lot, and I think that's a great example.
Carter Page's. Well, but hold on. Carter Page's life was destroyed by this. He can't get a job. He's considered a Russian spy or a villain. He's never been charged with anything. And your dossier that you ran has added, I think, a lot to the perception that he is a disloyal American. We now know he didn't take $11 billion in a Russian energy company. That's untrue. And you've spent all this time trying to talk about, you know, whatever, the Trump Tower, like who cares, in Moscow. And this guy lives with this claim against his name, and you haven't corrected it.
We've reported extensively on Carter Page, on his contact with Russian intelligence back in the day, on his denials. We've talked to him repeatedly. He was at my office at several months ago at a reception. I mean, I don't know how Carter Page feels he's been treated by us, but certainly we have carried his side of this. But it's funny that you were dismissive before of something because it's interesting. Like a lot of what I think you're exercised about and that your audience, I think sometimes understandably, is really exercised about, is the collusion story and the sometimes totally wild allegations about collusion. The Tower story, the story that you mentioned, the story that Michael Cohen is going to jail about lying about, the story that you feel Cohen, I think you and I probably disagree on exactly what Cohen said about it. It is not a collusion story. It's a real estate story. It is a great real estate story. Donald Trump.
I'm aware of that. No. And
can I just tell a story to your audience here that we're talking about? This is the story at the heart of this whole thing.
I want to get to.
You spent a lot of time talking about cats. Can I just talk for 2 minutes about the Trump Tower in Moscow?
I want to get to the specific claim that I made in my open, which I know you're going to want to respond to. That here you have Cohen and the Mueller investigation both debunking the so-called bombshell that you ran in January, and you're refusing to admit it has been debunked. I just played 2 pieces of tape, Michael Cohen saying essentially what BuzzFeed said is not true, but you're claiming it is still true. On what grounds?
I mean, if this was my show, I would have extended both of those clips a little longer. The first to show Michael Cohen saying, in his way, he was telling me to lie, which I just don't think there's a lot of dispute now that Cohen is saying that he claims, you could say he was lying, you don't have to believe Michael Cohen, he claims, he believes Trump was telling him to lie. Now, when when this first went out, you guys were calling it a hoax. You were saying the central thesis was wrong.
That's not what your piece said. Your piece said
he was directed to lie.
He personally instructed him. He explicitly told him to lie.
Personally instructed him. Cohen described a meeting in person
you said he
between the people.
Told him to lie.
Let me take them one at a time. Okay. Cohen described a personal meeting with Jay Sekulow and Trump, in which, in discussing his testimony, and this is something where everyone is chasing to get more detail of this, and it's a little hard for us to argue about it in the absence of like a transcript of the meeting. This isn't Nixon. We don't have audio. The things that Trump said, that you said before, were no Russia, no deal. I mean, if that is in the context of his testimony, that is certainly personal. They're talking to each other about his testimony. Is it explicit? I think that's a reasonable argument reasonable people can have. But the idea that this has been debunked, this is a hoax, I mean, the whole story has moved to a place where we're having a much narrower dispute here, Tucker. By the way, about a story that is not about collusion, about a story that is about lying about an amazing real estate deal in Moscow.
Look, I want to say, just once again, to be totally clear, I genuinely respect your coming on to defend your reporting. Most people won't, you will. And I think you deserve a lot of credit for that. But it's the details that matter in life as in news stories.
Absolutely.
And your story said, and I'm again quoting it, he explicitly told Cohen to lie. Cohen was asked twice by 2 separate Democratic members of Congress if that was true. He had every reason to say it was true, but he said it was untrue. So why not just say, maybe parts of our story were right, but we got over our skis, we went too far, we made a claim we can't back up, and that the subject of the allegation now denies. And we admit it. Why not just say that?
See, I guess I think, as Jason said recently, that the bar now seems to be, did he say, Michael I now instruct you to lie, and that anything short of that.
But that's what your
count
piece
as an instruction.
says. But your piece claims that. It says that he explicitly
Cohen says that
asked
what
him
Trump
to lie.
told him was, in the context of his testimony, no Russia, no deal. Again, the details of that exchange matter a lot. Exactly where he said that, exactly how he said that, matters a lot. But I think the question of whether Trump, is directing and ordering people and how he's talking about it is something everybody's kind of wrestling with right now. You saw the New York Times report that he had ordered Kelly to do something, but that they didn't know the exact words. And I do think at some point Michael Cohen, who is his trusted retainer, has worked for him for a long time, it is not, to me, totally crazy that he should be expected to be able to interpret his boss's words.
Okay. All right. Well, in any case, I appreciate your coming on tonight. Thank you.
Thanks for having me,
And
Tucker.
the door's always open to you and anyone else. Just appreciate it. Ben Smith. Michael Cohen's testimony last week seemed to put quite a dent in the Russia collusion narrative. So has the story changed at all? Take a guess. That's next. So if you took the politics out of it and tried to see things clearly and you paid close attention over the last week, you'd have to say you had more doubt about the Russia conspiracy than you had before. Michael Cohen, the president's personal lawyer for 10 years, turned on his boss, had all of his electronic communications seized by the Justice Department, said he was willing to reveal everything, says he hates Donald Trump, and in the end, he revealed what? He said there were no secret meetings, no hidden payoffs, no P-tape, no collusion. Doesn't matter. The people who believe in the Russia conspiracy believe just as much as they did before Michael Cohen testified. On a podcast last week, Hillary Clinton said it's the job of her party to keep digging, if necessary, all the way through the earth until they reach the Kremlin.
There is enough grounds in what has already been made public for the government, for Congress in particular, to be doing more with it. And I'm pleased that under Speaker Pelosi, the Democrats are beginning to hold hearings and try to connect some of these dots.
Michael Tracy is an independent journalist, and he joins us tonight. Michael Tracy, thanks very much for coming on. Have we reached the point where maybe it's not possible, metaphysically impossible, to prove that the Russia conspiracy isn't real?
Well, I think it's most instructive to look at what leading Democrats who have been leading the charge on this collusion narrative from the outset are now saying. They're totally changing their tune. Gerald Nadler, for example, who would lead impeachment proceedings against President Trump were it to come to that, has now been saying that he reserves the right to disagree with Robert Mueller's final report. Adam Schiff has been on the Sunday shows more than maybe any human in history, has been saying that there's already ample evidence in the public record to establish that collusion occurred. So he's also saying that we now have basis to simply disregard and wipe from the record the entire Mueller investigation because it's not necessary to prove collusion. These are the same people who have been screaming from the rooftops for 2 years that the entire edifice of American democracy rests on the sanctity of this investigation and the need to preserve it. And now they're saying that it's, just doesn't particularly matter. It's almost a remarkable about face. But because the media is so blinkered by their, Trump fixation, they're not totally cognizant of it. And I think your exchange with Ben Smith was actually illustrative of that as well. I was watching that with my jaw on the floor. You referred to BuzzFeed as a cat blog run by depressed Brooklynites, which is funny and true in a lot of ways, but they actually do occasionally produce what could be described as legitimate journalistic work.
They do. I agree with that. Yes.
But what Ben Smith is doing, and I have actually respect for Ben Smith, and I think he actually, demonstrates some integrity by appearing on your show. And
yes, I agree with that as well.
But what he and his, functionaries are doing at this point, by jumping through hoop after ludicrous hoop to rationalize why that story, which has now been so obviously undermined, is actually legitimate, they're taking away from the good work that some people within the BuzzFeed orbit are doing because they're automatically being associated and tarnished by association with this BuzzFeed story. I'll just give you another example of why none of this adds up. Jason Leopold, who is one of the co-authors of the initial story, appeared on MSNBC within hours of the story first breaking. Remember, when the story broke, it caused this, completely hysterical meltdown with every TV anchor screaming boom, bombshell like toddlers.
Oh, yeah.
But so to capitalize on that, elation, Jason Leopold went on MSNBC and said that he had seen documents that corroborated the central contention of the story, which is that Michael Cohen was directed by Trump to lie to Congress, which, as you mentioned, would be a felony. That's why people were flipping out. Members of Congress were calling for impeachment proceedings to begin right away. In claiming that he had seen primary documentation, Leopold gave the story extra potency. Because, okay, it's not just based on...
Where are those documents? We're almost out of time, but just tell me. I'm actually on the edge of my seat. Where are those documents? Do we know?
It's a huge mystery. I don't know. Maybe they fell down the rabbit hole with the rest of the proof of collusion that was supposed to be, provided at this point. Anyway, President Trump, when he calls the media fake news, he's often overwrought and he often exaggerates. Yes. But he's giving ammunition. But BuzzFeed and others are giving President Trump ammunition to make those claims when they so stubbornly and obstinately stick by a story which, by any plain reading, has been flatly contradicted.
Just admit it. Exactly. I completely forgot about that Leopold document point. Thank you for reminding us. Michael Tracy, as always, great to see you. Thank you. And by the way, Congressman Schiff, the chairman of the House Intel Committee, always welcome on this show. Again, as we've said before. Young pioneer Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez would like to totally take over the American economy in the name of the environment. Is she ready, though, to make the big sacrifices that all of us must make herself? That's the acid test always. We'll take a look after the break.